You would text them the moment something funny happened. You would call on the drive home just to share something small, a weird interaction with a coworker, a song that came on the radio that made you think of them, a thought that crossed your mind that you couldn't wait to say out loud to the one person who would actually get it. And they would tell you things too, small things, the kind of things that don't matter and somehow matter more than anything else. Because the small things are not really small. They are the evidence that you are inside each other's lives, that you are the person they think of first, that you are the one they want to share the ordinary, unremarkable, quietly beautiful texture of their day with. But at some point, somewhere between then and now, the small things stopped. You stopped texting the funny moment. They stopped calling on the drive. The small daily exchanges that used to feel effortless became something neither of you quite remembered to do anymore. And you told yourself it didn't matter. You're both busy. You're both adults. You don't need to narrate every moment of your day to feel connected. But here's the question that this episode is going to answer. If the small things didn't matter, why does their absence feel like something important is missing? And what does psychology tell us is actually happening inside a relationship when the small sharing stops? Stay with me. The answer is going to change how you see every quiet moment in your relationship. There is a particular kind of intimacy that exists in long-term relationships that almost never gets talked about in books or films or therapy offices. It is not the intimacy of grand declarations, not the intimacy of difficult conversations finally had, or the intimacy of surviving hard seasons together, not the intimacy of the wedding day or the birth of a child or the holding of hands in a hospital room. It is smaller than all of those, quieter, more ordinary. It is the intimacy of the small things. The text sent in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon about nothing in particular. The story shared at dinner about a conversation that happened while waiting for coffee. The random thought voiced at 11 at night, I was thinking about something today and I couldn't stop wondering. The small discovery, a song, a sentence in a book, a color in the evening sky, brought home and offered to another person like a gift that requires no wrapping. These small sharings are the daily fabric of intimate connection. And most couples, when they first come together, produce them constantly, naturally, effortlessly, without thinking about it. But in long-term relationships, something happens to this fabric. It begins to thin. The daily sharings become less frequent. The texts become purely logistical. The dinner conversations migrate towards schedules and responsibilities. The random thoughts stay inside. The small discoveries are experienced alone. And the relationship, though it continues to function, though both people still love each other, though nothing dramatic has changed, begins to feel somehow less alive, less present, less like a living thing, and more like an established structure that both people inhabit, but neither fully fills with life anymore. This is the psychology of why partners stop sharing the small things, and why that loss, invisible, unmeasured, unannounced, can quietly hollow out even the most loving relationship from the inside. I'm Dr. Alex Morden, and this is the connection theory. Let me start by reframing something that most people fundamentally misunderstand about the small things in relationships. We tend to think of small sharing, the daily texts, the random thoughts, the minor stories from our day, as a kind of optional extra. A nice feature of a relationship when it's present, but not essential, not structural, not load-bearing. The psychology tells a completely different story. Dr. John Gottman, whose research at the University of Washington has followed thousands of couples over decades, identified what he calls bids for connection as one of the most important predictors of long-term relationship health and satisfaction. A bid for connection, in Gottman's framework, is any attempt, large or small, verbal or nonverbal, to create a moment of emotional connection with a partner. And the smallest, most everyday bids, a comment shared, a story offered, a thought voiced, a funny observation made, turn out to be among the most structurally important of all. Here is why. Gottman's research found that couples who stayed together happily over the long term did not differ from struggling couples in the frequency of their conflicts, their fundamental compatibility, or even the depth of their love. They differed in one specific and measurable way. They turned toward each other's bids for connection. In stable, happy, long-term relationships, partners responded to each other's small bids, the story, the comment, the random thought, with engagement, with interest, with the signal that said, I received what you just sent. You have my attention. What you just offered mattered to me. In relationships that were heading toward disconnection or dissolution, partners consistently turned away from bids, not usually through dramatic rejection, but through distraction, minimal response, or simply not registering that a bid had been made. The turning away from small bids, repeated daily over months and years, was one of the most powerful predictors of relationship deterioration that Gottman found. More predictive in some cases than the presence of conflict or criticism. Because here is what the small things actually are, beneath the surface. They are trust bids, vulnerability offers, small, repeated tests of whether this relationship is still safe enough for the full, unfiltered, unimportant version of me to show up in. When those bids are consistently met with engagement, the message the nervous system receives is, this relationship is safe. I am seen here. I can be fully present here. When those bids are consistently not met, when the small things are shared and receive minimal response, or stop being shared because the response has taught the sharer that the bid won't land, the message is very different. This relationship is no longer the place where my full self is welcome. I will keep the small things to myself. And with that retreat, the big connection begins its slow, quiet departure. Here is a neurological truth about human beings that has profound implications for long-term relationships. The brain is a social prediction machine. At every moment, in every interaction, the brain is running a rapid, largely unconscious calculation based on past experience. If I share this, if I offer this thought, this story, this small piece of my inner experience, what is the likely response? Is the response worth the vulnerability of offering? In the early stages of a relationship, this calculation almost always comes back positive. The novelty of the relationship, the neurochemical excitement of new love, the consistent positive reinforcement of a partner who is genuinely interested and engaged, all of these factors tell the brain, share. The response will be good. The vulnerability is worth it. But over time, as the relationship matures and the neurochemical excitement of early love settles into the quieter rhythms of long-term partnership, the brain begins to update its predictions based on more recent data. If a partner has been consistently distracted when small things are shared, if they respond minimally or seem uninterested or pivot quickly back to their own concerns, the brain registers this pattern, and it begins to adjust the calculation. Sharing this is unlikely to produce the response I need. The vulnerability is greater than the likely return. I will keep this one to myself. At first, this adjustment is minor. A few small things kept inside, a few observations not voiced, a few texts typed and then deleted because they suddenly seemed not worth sending. But the adjustment compounds. Every small thing not shared makes the next small thing slightly less likely to be shared. Every unreturned bid decreases the confidence that the next bid will be received. And slowly, through the accumulation of hundreds of these tiny neurological recalibrations, a person who once shared everything with their partner begins to share almost nothing. Not because they stopped having small things worth sharing, but because the brain learned through careful, accurate, painful observation that sharing them no longer felt safe. This is not a relationship failure. It is the nervous system doing exactly what it is designed to do, protecting a person from repeated experiences of unmet vulnerability. But the protection comes at an extraordinary cost, because the safety the nervous system creates by stopping the sharing is the safety of isolation, the safety of a person who has learned to be self-sufficient inside a relationship, who has learned to experience their own life, privately, quietly, alone, even while sharing a home, even while sharing a bed, even while saying every morning and every evening, I love you. I want to make a case here for something that the culture of dramatic love stories has caused most people to fundamentally undervalue. Small sharing is not a byproduct of emotional intimacy. It is the mechanism through which emotional intimacy is continuously created and maintained. Think about the people in your life with whom you feel genuinely close. Not just the people you love, but the people with whom you feel a living, current, real sense of connection. The people who feel present in your life even when you haven't spoken in a while. Almost certainly, those are people with whom you share the small things, the random thoughts, the minor observations, the things that are barely worth mentioning, and somehow become the entire texture of a close relationship. Now think about the relationships in your life, romantic or otherwise, that have gone cold, where the closeness that once existed now feels like a historical fact rather than a current reality. Almost certainly, the small sharing stopped before anything else did. Before the big conversations became difficult. Before the conflict increased or the affection decreased. The small sharing stopped, quietly, gradually, without announcement. And the closeness began to hollow. Psychologist Arthur Aaron at Stony Brook University spent decades studying what creates and sustains emotional intimacy between people. And his research converged on something remarkably consistent. Intimacy is created through self-disclosure, through the sharing of personal thoughts, feelings, experiences, and observations, and through the experience of having that disclosure received and responded to with genuine interest and care. In other words, intimacy is not a static state. It is a dynamic, ongoing process. It requires regular input to sustain itself. And the most natural, most frequent, most accessible form of that input is the small things, the daily sharing that keeps two people continuously updated on each other's inner worlds. When that input stops, when the daily sharing dries up and both partners are experiencing their inner lives in isolation, the intimacy begins to decay. Not dramatically, not all at once, but steadily, incrementally, in direct proportion to the absence of the sharing that once fed it. This is why couples who stop sharing the small things find, eventually, that they have also lost access to the big conversations. They don't know how to talk about what matters most because they stopped practicing on what matters least. The emotional vocabulary of the relationship has atrophied from disuse, and the vulnerability required to share something significant feels unbearable when the ground of daily small sharing is no longer there to support it. Now let's get specific about the patterns that accelerate this process, the specific mistakes that couples make that cause the small sharing to disappear faster than it otherwise would. Mistake 1. Treating distraction as harmless. The most common and most damaging pattern is this. One partner offers a small thing, a story, a thought, an observation, and the other is distracted. Not rudely, not deliberately, just distracted in the very ordinary, very modern way that most people are distracted for most of their waking hours. Half reading something on a phone, half watching something on a screen, half present in the conversation while half occupied somewhere else entirely. And the partner who offered the small thing receives a response that is minimal, an acknowledgement without real engagement, an answer without genuine interest, a surface-level response that signals, without intending to, "I heard you, but I wasn't really listening." The partner who offered the bid may not consciously register this as a wound. They may shrug it off, tell themselves it doesn't matter, continue the conversation on its surface level. But somewhere beneath the conscious level, the brain notes. The nervous system files the data. And the next time a small thing arises that wants to be shared, the threshold for sharing is very slightly higher. Repeated 1,000 times, which is approximately how many times this pattern plays out in an average month of modern couple life, the threshold rises to a point where the small things simply stop being offered. Mistake 2. Responding with problem solving instead of presence. This is particularly common in relationships where one partner communicates primarily through analysis or practical solutions. A partner shares something small, a frustration, a minor observation, something that happened during their day, not because they need it fixed, but because they need to feel received. They need the experience of offering a piece of their inner world and having it witnessed by another person. But their partner responds with analysis, with advice, with a practical framework for why what happened makes sense or what should be done about it. The response is intelligent. It is often accurate. It is completely beside the point. Because the sharing was not a problem presented for solving, it was a bid for presence, for the simple, profound, irreplaceable experience of having another human being say, with their full attention, "I'm here. I hear you. What you just shared matters to me." When small sharings are consistently met with solutions instead of presence, the sharer eventually learns, sharing with this person does not give me what I need. I will stop offering what they cannot receive. Mistake 3, forgetting that interest must be demonstrated. In long-term relationships, it is extremely common for partners to feel genuine interest in each other while demonstrating very little of it. They care about what their partner thinks and feels and experiences, but they have stopped actively showing that care in the moment. Stopped asking the follow-up question. Stopped leaning forward. Stopped putting down what they were doing to fully receive what was being offered. And the partner who is sharing cannot feel internal caring. They can only feel demonstrated interest. When demonstrated interest disappears, when the partner who is sharing receives no follow-up questions, no genuine engagement, no signal that what they shared actually landed anywhere, the sharing eventually stops. Not because they stopped having things to share, but because sharing into absence is one of the loneliest experiences available to a human being in a relationship. Mistake 4, waiting for big conversations instead of small ones. Many couples, when they recognize that their connection has deteriorated, attempt to address it through big conversations. Sit-down talks about the state of the relationship. Deep discussions about what is wrong and what needs to change. These conversations are important, but they often fail not because the intent is wrong, but because the foundation for them has eroded. Big emotional conversations require a level of emotional safety, trust, and vulnerability that is built and maintained through small daily interactions. When the small sharing has been absent for months or years, the relationship no longer has the emotional infrastructure to support a large, vulnerable conversation. The big talk feels too exposed, too high stakes, too much to hold. What is needed first is not the big conversation. What is needed is the return of the small ones. The reestablishment of the daily practice of sharing. Small, low stakes, ordinary, real. The big connection does not return through big conversations. It returns through the accumulation of small ones. We need to talk about the environment that modern American life has created for couple communication, because it is an environment that is almost perfectly designed to eliminate small sharing. Consider what has happened to the moments in daily life that used to be the natural containers for small things being shared. The commute home, once a transition space that ended with a partner to talk to, is now a podcast or a phone call or a silence filled with audio content. The evening meal, once the primary daily ritual of family sharing, happens in front of screens in millions of American households. The quiet moments before sleep, once the intimate window of small thoughts shared in the dark, are now filled with scrolling, with the infinite blue light of a device offering endless content that is more stimulating than silence. The structural containers for small sharing have been dismantled, one by one, without anyone quite noticing, and replaced with individual content. Consumption. Two people who once shared the small things with each other now share them instead with their feeds, with their group chats, with the social media audiences who receive their small observations and respond with the dopamine-delivering currency of likes. Psychologist Sherry Turkle at MIT has documented this shift extensively. She describes it as a fundamental change in the direction of self-disclosure, away from intimate partnership and toward the digital audience. And she argues that this shift is not merely a change in medium. It is a change in intimacy itself. In and who we think of as our primary receiver of our inner life. When a partner's primary audience for their small thoughts and daily observations is no longer their partner, when the text goes to the group chat instead of to the person sleeping next to them, the relationship loses something it may not even know it is losing, until the distance is too wide to easily cross. I want to say something now that I believe is the most important thing in this entire episode. The small things that partners stop sharing are not small at all. They are the daily evidence of a fundamental psychological truth. You are my primary person. You are the one I think of first when something happens in my life. You are the witness of my ordinary experience. You are the person I choose to let inside my inner world. When a partner shares something small, truly unimportant, truly not worth mentioning, they are not sharing information. They are making a statement of relationship. They are saying, with a text about a funny parking lot incident or a random thought about something they saw on their lunch break, you are my person. I am inside my life right now, and I want you to be inside it with me. That is the meaning of the small things. That is what stops when the sharing stops. And this is why the loss of small sharing creates the particular kind of loneliness it creates. Not the loneliness of isolation, but the loneliness of being in a relationship and experiencing your life alone. Of having things happen and noticing that you no longer instinctively reach for your partner to share them with. Of realizing in a quiet moment that the person you love most is somehow no longer the first person you think of. When did that change? And what would it take to change it back? The answer, and it is simpler than most couples expect, is to begin again with one small thing. Not a conversation about the relationship, not a discussion about what has been lost or why it left. Just one small thing, shared, genuinely, with the person who used to be and can be again the first person you think of. A thought that crossed your mind, a thing you saw that reminded you of them, a small, ordinary, barely worth mentioning piece of your inner life, offered to the person who matters most, and received by them with the full attention that says, I am here. You chose me. I receive this. Keep going. That is how the big connection returns. Not through the big conversations, through the small ones. One unremarkable, irreplaceable, quietly profound small thing at a time. Here's what I want you to carry out of this episode. Somewhere in your relationship, at some point in the time between the beginning and right now, the small sharing started to thin. The texts became logistical. The dinner conversations became functional. The random thoughts stayed inside. It did not happen because you stopped caring. It happened because modern life is extraordinary at creating conditions that crowd out the small things. Because busy people are extraordinary at accidentally prioritizing what is urgent over what is quietly, persistently most important. But here's what the research tells us with absolute consistency. The couples who stay most deeply connected over the longest time are not the couples who have the fewest problems. They are not the couples who are most compatible by every external measure. They are the couples who maintained the practice of small sharing, who kept finding each other in the small moments, who kept choosing each other as the first person to tell, who kept the daily current of ordinary mutual disclosure running, even when life was busy, even when the moments were brief, even when the things being shared were genuinely, wonderfully, unimportantly small. Start tonight with one small thing. The funny thing that happened this afternoon, the thought you had on the drive home, the thing you noticed that made you think of them. Share it, mean it, and listen, really listen when they share something back. That is the whole practice. That is the entire secret of the big connection. It lives in the small things. It always has. I'm Dr. Alex Morgan. This has been The Connection Theory. If this reached something in you today, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe for more, and I'll see you in the next one.